Today, we'll be discussing my guests' personal journeys in software development and developing with APIs. We're going to touch on what you should know about Canva users and how we think the role of ecosystems will drive creativity and innovation on the Canva platform. We're also going to delve into Canva's approach to AI and how we think developers can leverage this to supercharge design experiences. And finally, we're looking forward to opening up to the floor for your questions. So now I'd like to introduce my guests. First up, joining us is Cameron Adams, co-founder and Canva's Chief Product Officer. And sitting alongside me here is Brendan Humphreys, Canva's Head of Engineering. Welcome. So I'll start with you, Cam. Can you tell us about your early experience as a developer?
I have a piece of paper that says I'm a software engineer, but no one else would actually consider me to be a software engineer. I studied law and computer science at university and totally forgot to apply for any jobs towards the end of that, and wound up just continuing my part-time job, which was graphic design. I was a graphic designer for this software, mail order software company, like well before the internet was invented. And I just kept that going. And eventually the internet came around and I started getting into web design. And web design really fused my love of coding for my love with design. So that was like my earliest experience as a developer, working in like Front Page and Dreamweaver, uploading stuff via Qt-FTP, getting people's websites together. It was a real fusion of creativity and coding.
Great, thanks. Brendan, let's hear about your journey.
Look, I'm going to be giving away my age a little bit, but I started as a kid on a Commodore 64. Any other Commodore 64? Yes, represent. I didn't really know what I was doing back then. I think I was like 10 or 11. But what was very clear at that very, very early exposure to the technology was just this whole world of possibility opening up. And so from that very early age, I was pretty much set on being a software engineer, and led me to a degree in software engineering. Unlike Cam, I didn't forget to apply for jobs. I've been 25 years in the industry. I've worked for some of the biggest companies in the world. I've had my own company. I sold that company to Atlassian back in 2007, and I watched that company go through its ecosystem journey and its hyper-growth journey. And we've been able to apply that learning in Canva's journey. I was able to jump across from Atlassian to Canva when Canva was a much smaller company. There were only 12 of us. And here we are today launching the Apps SDK. Very exciting.
Thanks. So Brendan, staying with you, thinking back to those early days, what were the first APIs you built on top of and what did you really like about them?
So as a software developer, pretty much every single project that you work on is going to touch APIs. You're dealing and you're building on top of abstractions that are typically represented through APIs, whether that's the operating system that you're dealing with or some third-party integration. And I guess over 25 years, I've seen them all. Great APIs, terrible APIs, and I reflect on what makes a really good API. First and foremost, you're just looking for power. You're looking for a really powerful API that can do a whole lot of heavy lifting for you so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. That involves getting the right level of abstraction. It involves putting a lot of effort into the API design so that it's very composable. But it also means operationally, you're looking for that API to be extremely reliable and well documented, so it's really easy to consume, it's really easy to use. The favorite for me, look, it's hard to go, I know we've got some AWS folks in the room, it's hard for me to go past AWS just for the sheer power that it gives startups and large companies alike in getting people onto the cloud and building scalable architectures very, very quickly. But another one I'd call out is Stripe's API, which is fantastic, and certainly we used it in anger in Canva's early days to very quickly build a billing capability and not have to build that from first principles. We're able to leverage Stripe's excellent API and particularly well-documented API to get a billing system up and running in weeks, where if we're building it from first principles, if we're talking to all those individual payment gateways and dealing with all the arcane interactions that involves, we would have been there for months. So yeah, that'd be the two call-outs I'd make.
Thanks, Cam. What were your first builds?
I think technically my first API was probably the browser itself. So when I started, browsers were totally non-standardized. You would use document.layers in Netscape, you'd use something else for IE, and I was actually part of early web standards development that was codifying all of that to like bring it together into a common language that could be used across all the browsers. In terms of like APIs, is how I think we're kind of thinking about it in terms of a third-party kind of consumption way. I mentioned it in the intro to the day, but working with Flickr was probably my most early formative API experience, and just getting access to this incredible data was amazingly exciting to me because you could do all sorts of creative data visualizations with it. You could help people connect at real-life events as they were taking photographs and recommending people that they should connect to. And it was a really fascinating world for me. And then that went into Twitter, and I played around with a lot of the Google APIs. I was there when Google Maps was getting developed. And before they even had an API for Google Maps, people were hacking at it, figuring out ways that they could embed Google Maps in the website and manipulate it to do things. And that actually led Google to create a formal API for Google Maps.
So what were some of the visualizations that you built?
So I did a lot of Twitter ones because there was actually a business need for that. So taking people tweeting in a particular city or at a particular concert and surfacing that on screen. With Flickr, they're all based around photo data. But photo data has geographic aspects to it. It has the people who took it. They have data about the cameras that took the actual photograph. And I quite often used it for physical events, actually events like this, but big conferences where people were getting together, and I would kind of surface all the content that was being created around that, whether it was photographs or tweets or blog posts, and kind of show those on screen and show the connections between them. So as people like wrote a blog post, they were talking about this conference talk where the speaker was, and you can bring those connections to life, which I think is really fascinating to me.
Thanks. So thinking about those experiences as builders, what are some of the hard-earned lessons that you've learned along the way?
Probably the hardest lesson I've learned is never to rely on the internet. So particularly when you're running something at an event, having connection to a data source, making sure that your app is just incredibly robust. So the Katy Perry one we had, I had to bug fix that because we're relying on this image service that we needed to go and fetch all the tweets before Twitter actually had an actual image service itself. And making sure that you didn't rely on that service and that your app wouldn't crash just because it didn't receive a request back from the image service was probably my biggest lesson learned in terms of APIs.
Yeah. Brendan?
So I definitely would echo Cam's sentiments. You certainly want to, you're entering into a contract when you're consuming APIs, so you want to really understand there's a trust relationship there. If you're going to rely on that API, you want to understand what is that contract. I really love Jeff Bezos' quote around avoiding undifferentiated heavy lifting. As a startup, you are constantly faced with opportunity cost, what to actually work on. You've got so few resources, so limited amount of time. So if you can find APIs that you can leverage to get a whole lot of value really quickly, then that gives you that massive boost so that you can focus on your insight, your niche, your differentiator, rather than kind of reinventing the wheel. So that's certainly something that we looked for at Canva. As I mentioned, we're consumers of many APIs. And we've used that so that we're not reinventing the wheel. We're standing on the shoulders of these giants that are providing platforms for us and then able to focus in on our niche, which is, at the time, was the Canva editor and getting that into the marketplace. So that's I mentioned Stripe as the other example also, which we leveraged to great effect. It's really about finding those APIs that can give you real value and do a whole lot of heavy lifting for you so that you're not having to reinvent the wheel.
So what should developers, people here, know about Canva's users to help them to create a really successful app on Canva?
I think we had a great session upstairs with some of the design team, but as Andrew said, you'll hear the number 135 million quite a lot today, and that means that the people you're dealing with are incredibly diverse. They're people from all walks of life. It's not like you're just catering to engineers, or you're just catering to designers, or you're just catering to marketers. You're catering to all of them. And they come to Canva with very different jobs to be done. Some people come to Canva to make a resume. Some people come to make a presentation deck for their startup. Some people come to make a flyer that they're going to put up in the window of their shop. And I think the power of Canva is that we've built a tool that is flexible enough and powerful enough to meet all those needs. But with that comes real discipline you have to have in building the product and making sure that you maintain that power and that flexibility. And you've got an incredibly diverse range of people in mind as you're building everything. So when you're thinking about your app, it means that people will be putting your app to uses that you probably have no idea about, something you've never fathomed before. And you need to be able to deal with that, be flexible. Allow people to put a talking artificial presenter in a flyer. That doesn't make sense, but people are going to do it. Allow people to have a QR code in a 3D world. Maybe something you've never thought of, but people are going to try it anyway. So dealing with that flexibility and being robust about it, I think is really important when you're dealing with our users.
Thanks. Brendan?
Look, I don't have too much more to add from what Cam mentioned, other than to say that one of our core values at Canva is that we obsess about making complex things simple, and we obsess about doing that for our users. And I think Canva is loved by its user base because it gives people this real feeling of empowerment, that they come to Canva, they have very little graphic design skills, and we give them the tools and the content to be able to produce very visually pleasing assets. So I guess the message for app developers is how are you going to create that sense of empowerment in our users so that they feel that excitement when they use your app. But some of the apps that I've seen in the beta program, I don't think that's going to be a problem.
I think another thing I'd add on is that Canva audience is incredibly global. US is a big market for us. It's the biggest market for us, but it's always neck and neck with Brazil. And behind that, you've got Mexico, you've got India, you've got places like the Philippines and Indonesia. So it's an incredibly diverse user base. They speak lots of different languages. They have different cultures. They have different design trends, aesthetic things that they're going through. They have different events throughout the year. And working with a global audience is also a really important part of the experience.
And another point that you just reminded me of is that we have more users interacting with Canva on mobile devices than on traditional laptops or desktops. So it's really important to think about that mobile experience when you're building your app. And if you can, ship the app that works in both environments. And we've got tools that are there now and tools that are coming that'll help you do that in a responsive way.
We've already touched on this in one of Cam's responses to a previous question, but really curious to understand how you both believe ecosystems are drivers of creativity and innovation. I'll start with you, Cam.
I'll let Brendan go first.
Okay, Brendan, you can go first.
Thank you. Look, I saw this play out at Atlassian. I was at the front seat at their ecosystem play. That has been just an amazing success to see this flywheel of creativity get turned on by their expressive API that they launched. And now they have this vast ecosystem of thousands and thousands of apps. The reality is that there are so many industries out there that have visual communication at their core. And we, as a company, cannot service them all. We can't service them all because we don't have the developers. we can't service them all because we don't have the domain expertise that people in this room have. So creating an ecosystem, creating that platform allows other people to bring their firepower, to bring their domain knowledge, and to build on top solutions that we just aren't equipped to build. So that's the exciting thing. We don't have enough time. We don't have the domain expertise. Over to you.
I think in terms of creativity and innovation, there's this interesting, it's almost a dichotomy, but like often the more you constrain people or give them a framework to work within, the more creative they get. And we kind of see this with Canva. You put people in front of a blank page, they'll freak out. But you give them a few templates and a magic right to start with, and they'll dive in. And I've seen this time and time again. I've built creative tools for most of my life. Obviously, we built Canva. Well before that, I used to build a lot of little kind of toys that I'd put up on the internet. And these little toys would be very simple mechanisms. So one of them was a collaborative drawing piece where everyone could place 1 pixel a day. Another one was this little 3D engine where you could just put down a bunch of random 3D blocks. And another one was this blob generator where you could pull apart a circle into all these different blobs. And they were super simple mechanics. Like, people could just do it in a second. But I was always amazed with what people actually created with those things. For me, the part of the enjoyable process was creating the tool and then just throwing it out there. And I could never make anything good with the tool itself. But when I threw it out there, people would spend hours on it. They would spend hours like putting 3D blocks one on top of the other to recreate the Firefox logo in 30,000 blocks. Or they would make a peacock out of 5,000 different blobs. And it was just mind-blowing that people who often didn't consider themselves creative, when you put in front of them an interesting tool that had just the right constraints, it really unlocked that for them. And that's what I really see with APIs as being this framework that you give people that allows them to focus on a particular thing and gives them blocks that they can recombine in infinite ways. And as Brendan said, come up with things that we have never thought of.
It's a great example. So as you all have been listening to the talks throughout today, you would have heard us mention AI a lot and AI-powered design as well. So I'd love to talk a bit about Canva's approach to using AI in design and what you think the opportunity for developers are.
So we've invested heavily in AI over the years. You might say we were kind of early to the AI bandwagon before it was cool. We've been using it internally for recommendations, for propensity analysis, for improving our search results. Generative AI has exploded onto the scene in recent months. I don't need to tell anyone in the room that that's a phenomenon. And that's created an explosion of possibilities. We think that Canva is a fantastic platform for this to host this explosion. There's so many of these very, very cool generative AI tools are features, and they're features that can thrive in an ecosystem that Canva provides. That ecosystem provides this cohesive experience. It provides that interactive, collaborative editing experience so that once you drop your generative AI in there, you can iterate, users can iterate and collaborate around it, and that's really powerful. And then we provide all of the basic mechanics, user management, foldering, search, etc., so that you don't have to build that. And then you get to market really, really quickly because you've got 135 million plus monthly active users that are eyeballs on your app that give you that launch pad straight away. So we're aiming to make it really, really easy to integrate into our cohesive platform and allow you to focus on, you know, the core amazing model that you've come up with, that niche of generative AI, but yet adding to that whole cohesive experience is key.
I think the whole notion of Canva itself is about condensing time and making something easier and simpler and faster. And before Canva existed, you could do design, but it just took a long time, and it took a lot of money, and it took a lot of people. And we've constantly been compressing that timeline down to make visual content creation simple enough for anyone to approach, in a small amount of time with a small budget and get great quality out of it. And originally, the technology that we used for that was the web and mobile phones and what's available. 10 years on, AI is now on the scene, and we very much see it in the same vein. Like, AI is a way that we can continue to condense that timeline, condense the number of people that need to work on something, and improve the quality that you can get out of it. But at the end of the day, it's still a piece of technology. And if you just take a piece of technology and throw it at your average person, they're not going to know what to do with it. They're not going to have a use for it. So you really need to frame that in terms of a much larger customer experience where you're taking AI as a technology and applying it to a pain point or a problem that people have and help them solve something that they really want to solve. Help them achieve something in the real world that they couldn't achieve before. And that's the biggest piece of advice I'd give to anyone who's working in AI, is still continue to focus on the user problem, the job to be done, and make sure that you're servicing that more than you're servicing the technology itself.
Thank you. So, final question from me to you both. Why should developers invest time in building apps for Canva users? Who wants to take that one first?
I think we've covered it quite a bit, but just to labour the point, Canva's an app that is used by hundreds of millions of people around the world in many, many different countries. It brings delight to a diverse range of users, and the app's SDK is just a fantastic opportunity to leverage that audience to bring your unique functionality, the power of your app to that incredibly diverse audience.
When I think back to what we most needed when we were starting out, I think having easy access to distribution channels is incredibly powerful. When we built our first iPhone app, having millions of people that could immediately install it, having the App Store promote it, having a really great partnership with Apple played a pivotal role in getting our mobile app established. And I very much hope Canva can be the same sort of place for people that are starting out, people that have established companies as well, to be that place they can come to access a huge and unique audience, and really use it as a place where you can grow your product, learn more about your product, iterate, and use the scale and reach that Canva has to improve what you're offering on our platform as well as on your own platform.
Thank you. Okay, we have some time for questions from the floor. We'll also have a roving mic. So, questions for Cam? Okay, thanks. Cam or Brendan, thank you. There's a mic behind you.
Thank you. I'm Atal, and I use Canva for kind of like just basic work, and I just love the platform. And I see Mid-Journey coming in from a very generative AI perspective, which helps me create a very different type of content. And you have a great user base of 135 million people who are actively. Where do you see yourself with other new generative AI-based tools, which are actually the models, and how do you position Canva in that way?
I think you're seeing an interesting thing, like still very early days in AI and generative AI in general. So I think you're seeing a lot of startups and companies figure out where they're going. But I feel like there's room for a whole ton of different models. Mid-Journeys is awesome. I've seen so much amazing concept art come out of it. But the different players in the field are kind of becoming opinionated in different areas. So I think you'll see specialization happen, where Mid-Journey might be great for artists. DALL-E might be great for, I don't know, everyday presentation images. The stuff that you get at Canva might be particular to our audience. Maybe it's enterprises. And you'll see these kind of tailorings of the different models emerging. And that will be driven a lot by the types of data that you can get access to, that train your model, the types of customers that you're focusing on, even down to your business model. Like, how are you going to monetize what you're creating, and who are you talking to that's going to pay you for this particular service?
Thank you. More questions? Hi.
Hey, can you hear me? Oh, cool. I'm Lynn Cole with Afterflee. I have like a contrarian opinion, but I just wanted to see what you considered. So I'm wondering if you're of the same opinion that influencers and creators may be the market might be uh, sh- not be able to keep up with autonomous agents or particularly like output of things that can access your API. So as part of your strategy, maybe and like, what are your thoughts on the future of creators and influencers not being your main target users in the future?
So you mean very specifically for us as an organization, or more generally, like what's content creation going to look like? I'll give that one to Brendan while I think.
Yeah, thanks. That's a tough question. Look, I think that for the foreseeable future, there is going to be an essential human element in content creation. And we see Canva being a platform where the AI technology will be your assistant, will help you in driving design, but ultimately the design is going to be in human hands where you iterate on it and you refine it with a human element. I don't see, at least for the foreseeable future, that being completely automated away. Part of the reason I don't see it being automated away is that people love doing that. That is really powerful, empowering for humans to actually go through that design process. So I don't think that people, even if they could outsource it to a machine fully, will. Not that we're anywhere near that future. So I think for a whole lot of use cases, you've got that assistant angle, that kind of the very powerful assistant alongside you, helping you do the design. But then ultimately, you've got the editor and that human iteration that's collaborative, which is an essential part of the exercise.
I think to add on to that, I feel like a rising tide lifts all boats. So a lot of the work that AI is now picking up is, yes, very kind of manual technical work that some people do nowadays. But as AI gets introduced, it opens up even more new opportunities in terms of creativity, in terms of what you create, in terms of how quickly you can do it. And it becomes a skill in itself. And you're already seeing this in terms of like prompt engineers, like people understanding how to interface with these models and being able to manipulate them way better than lots of other people. And it becomes a job into itself. And it reminds me of this stat that 60% of the jobs that exist now did not exist in 1940, which I think is just an incredible show of the resilience of humans and people to find new areas to work in, to explore new technologies, to find new skills and find ways that they can add value.
Thanks. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for. Thank you so much for your questions, appreciated, and thank you to Cam and Brendan for
Thanks, Anna.
joining us today. Thanks. Thanks, everyone.